Well, thank you, everybody. I was sitting here having a conversation with myself. So, as the tech gremlins have me, we'll start again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We are pleased to have you at the International Institute's conversation on climate change and COVID. Welcome to this conversation today. As we do everything with the International Institute, we like to begin with grounding ourselves in the why, and the why of balancing justice in this unequal impact between climate change and COVID. The why is pretty simple. The why is that climate change and health equity and social justice, environmental sustainability are hugely important and complex issues, yet we cannot afford to address them separately. The root causes are the same, and the stakes are way too high. The need for action is urgent and upon us now, and the opportunities for teamwork are far too serious, and we cannot afford to leave anything on the table. The conversation is built upon three strong pillars: leadership, innovation, and investment. And we ask each one of you who are tuning in today to stand strongly in one of those pillars, hold on to them, add to this interactive conversation, and let's come up with solutions together on what we can do in order to address the issues at hand. We have our keynote speaker, our guest speaker is with us today, Daniel Kreeger. Daniel is the co-founder and executive director of Action for Climate Change Officers. He has vast experience establishing partnerships and collaborating with federal agencies, environmental nonprofits, and academic institutions and multinational corporations. Daniel has led industry conferences such as GreenGov Symposium in partnership with the White House Council on Environmental Quality and Climate Leadership Conference and Awards in partnership with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Climate Registry Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. On a personal note, Daniel is analytical, he's creative, he's a skilled communicator, and very much a forward thinker on issues related to climate change, environmental sustainability, and national security. I'd like to have Daniel come on in and join us today in this conversation.
Hi, Viola. Thanks so much for having me join you today.
Thank you. I so appreciate you coming here. So this conversation is conversational. We're trying to understand some things and want to hear your perspective. We're in a moment right now, Daniel. This moment is something. There's so much going on, quite literally, in the world. We're on fire. In some places in our streets, their souls are on fire, trying to march towards their humanity and make that known. And then our climate is just in flux. Our weather is all over the place. So what's the importance of this moment right now?
Well, I'll tell you, and I feel like I'm a youngin'. I'm 44 years old. I never thought I would see a day that looked anything like what it does right now. We're at this intersection of dealing with a changing planet that we've induced and accelerated at a rate that is moving faster than we're going to be able to deal with if we don't get our arms around this immediately. That's built on the shoulders of hundreds of years of suppressing communities of color by design or by negligence, both in different places and for different reasons, coupled with a polarization of politics that has taken place really over the past 20 years by design, where we can't seem to agree on anything, like even what we had for dinner last night, and where there's a tension and an animosity that is off the charts. And we're on the precipice, and one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to figure out how to come back from the precipice and build a better tomorrow, or we're going diving off a terrible, terrible cliff. And we're going to we're going to take a step in one of those directions in the next couple of weeks here in the U.S., but this is also something that's happening worldwide. This is not distinct to the U.S. We're seeing the same sort of movements happening in politics and animosity and tension around the world. That uncertainty, that tension, the critical nature of the issues that we're dealing with, access to resources, conflict, all of these things are happening at the same time. It's a lot to get our arms around.
It is a lot to get our arms around. I don't even know. Sometimes I wonder myself, do we have the strength? Do we have the wherewithal to go there? With the work that you're doing in HO, let's hear a little bit about that work and how you're trying to put your arms around what's happening.
Well, and I think the work that we're doing correlates to the can we do it. I'm a can do. I frankly wouldn't be here otherwise. I think we can. I think humanity is capable of amazing things, amazing sometimes in the positive and amazing sometimes in the stupidity of it. And, about 12 years ago, I actually was working at a law firm doing business development for the environmental practice group of the law firm. Clients at the time were who's who of defense contractors and major international companies. When the idea for an organization was dropped in my lap, and the idea was that originally was there needed to be an organization that trained the general counsels of big organizations on the legal risks that were facing in the context of climate change. Now, my co-founder, when he put that idea into my head, didn't realize that that in my background was that I'd helped launch an organization after 9/11 that surfaced as a result of Congress's efforts to go after the bin Laden money trail. Requirement that was imposed through legislation that all financial institutions implement certain money laundering capabilities. If you've ever seen the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, what you see in that movie is that there's a handful of people who know anything about money laundering in the country. Well, that was the case up until 9/11. And all of a sudden there's a bill and every institution has to have it, and you've got to work with this to do it. I helped build that organization. And so when the idea for this, what we are today, what ECO is today, was put in my lap, I realized, oh shoot, climate change is not an environmental challenge. It's a human capital issue. We have to learn how to thrive on a planet that looks different than the one we thought we used to live on. The planet is changing because of our own negligence and our own carelessness and recklessness. There are going to be consequences to bear for that. We have to plan for that. We also need to slow this thing down. You can't do that without an army. This is a human capital challenge. And if you want to tackle this challenge, you better have an army of skilled people from total that are enabled from planning to design to financial decision making to dealing with preparedness and resilience to economic development to health and human implication across the board. Everybody's going to have to relearn how to thrive in the world we're entering into and not the one we used to be in. And the good news is we have other reasons for doing that, needing to do that as well, because the world we were in wasn't really so great to begin with. So we see this as an opportunity to build the workforce of tomorrow, to lift everybody up, to build the army that is going to be able to tackle this challenge. And when we do put our word like that, we can do amazing things. We're teleporting corpse. We've got more technology in the palm of our hand than the aggregate of human history. That all happened in 10 years. So we can do this.
I believe you. I mean, every time I talk to you, I get energized. This feeling that I have is like, woe is me. When I speak to you, you're like, this is possible. While this is yet possible and there's so much that we can do, I think I would love for you to help to connect the dots between social justice and climate change. Where are the intersections and why is that important to this work?
Yeah, well, in the defense and national security communities, climate change is referred to as a threat multiplier. So climate change isn't this new risk that we face. What it is it's an exacerbator or multiplier of the risks that we already have and the vulnerabilities that we have. It preys upon the weak. So let's look at what we're dealing with. We've got communities that were left behind. If we look in the U.S. in particular, I think that there are three types of communities that have been left behind, and for very different reasons. So I'm gonna identify them as being communities of color, and in particular inner city communities, rural communities, and Native American communities. Now let's look at the reasons why. In some of the instances, it is, in two of those three instances, it's systemic racism that is the reason they've been left behind.
That's
In
a
the
powerful
other,
statement.
it's corporate greed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is equally powerful, right? So you've got communities in inner city America and rural America that don't have basic broadband internet. If you don't have broadband internet, you're not in the 21st century. You
It's
can't.
true.
That is something that inner city communities have in common with rural communities, but for different reasons. One of which was for greed, one of them was by systemic racism. And the outcome, though, is the same. And so what we have is a group of people who are disenfranchised, who've been oppressed, who don't have access to the appropriate resources. And now when you take, and that was just one example, when you take the weight, the burden that a changing climate is placing on communities that have been left behind, they're not equipped to deal with the challenge. And so we look at this and say, how do we build up those communities? And ironically, the US does this all around the world. We put an enormous amount of money as a country into helping develop countries that need that development with microfunding projects and building their capacity to learn and to maintain the concept of teaching people to fish so that they can fish themselves as opposed to giving them fish. We don't do that here in the US. We don't do that in our own communities.
So is that the reason why when I go outside and I look at my city of Baltimore or my home city of Boston, there's so much that is still needed?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I grew up in South Florida. I be the first to acknowledge, I was very fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on Miami Beach. My parents, mom is a judge, dad's a lawyer. I was fortunate to not have to worry about how to have food on the table in my youth. I did have to in my adult life for my own bad decision making.
Yeah.
But I had the ability to recover from it because of the opportunities that were afforded to me, in large part because of the color of my skin. Although I should also mention that being Jewish means that I'm also on a large part of the planet, including the U.S. I'm also in the same boat of systemic racism. One of the things that I've seen, and I was shocked to see this, I didn't know this about Miami. I never understood why there were neighborhoods that have and didn't, and neighborhoods that didn't.
Sure.
Until I saw some of the plans going back into the 40s, where it was by intentional design that Black communities were carved up and by design were suppressed. Literally in the outright plans for the city, they're written out, clear as day. And if we go back in other communities around the country, and that's in Miami, in other parts of the country, we're going to see the exact same things. Whether it's spelled out that clearly or not doesn't matter. We design these communities, as Nancy Smith would say, we design these communities to fail. Whether it was deliberate or it was negligence, it doesn't matter. And so at the end of the day, you've got communities that have been left behind. They have not had sufficient resources, sufficient education and training. They've been designed, they've been isolated. And the result of that is a divergence in communities that have, communities that have not. And now what we see with climate change and even with this pandemic, those are the communities that are being hit disproportionately hard. And we can do better than this, and we must do better than this.
So we have three big buckets of things that seem to be kind of a rain cloud pouring down and creating unequal opportunities. What's the right next step forward to address climate change, holding justice at the center? It seems like justice is the theme that runs throughout. We've identified the root cause here to have those three big buckets. How do we do that? What's the right next thing that needs to happen?
Well, I get it. The first and foremost, I'm a systems thinker. I think everything is connected. And I don't care if you're in rich, affluent, white part of the world or not. At the end of the day, all of our economies are interconnected. Our natural systems are interconnected. Our built systems are interconnected. And the first thing we have to do is recognize that there is no isolation of anything. What affects me affects you, period. And we're all in this together. And we haven't accomplished that as a civilization just yet. And I don't just mean that in the US. The reality is we don't have that globally, right? At some point we have to get over territorialism and nationalism
Sure.
and figure out how to lift each other up. And culturally, that happens within countries, beyond. Those things have to happen. When they don't, we see the sort of conflict that we've seen in world wars, and in regional conflicts, and there are other contributors to it as well. The second thing is we have to recognize that that communities have been left behind, are disproportionately impacted because of the lack of resource and lack of capacity to deal with these things as they're being thrown at them. That's one of the recognitions that needs to take place. But two, by design, they've actually been put in the crosshairs of the impact. So it's not just that they don't have the ability. It turns out that by overpaving, by removing tree canopy, by providing insufficient infrastructure, we're actually drawing in the worst impact. So in communities that don't have sufficient tree canopy, we're seeing temperatures that are as much as 18 or 20 degrees warmer on the same day as a community that is 5 or 10 blocks away. We need to accept that has been the case. And we need to immediately put in designs to address it. And that's going to require better systems thinking, better accountability, and rethinking how we make priorities of we've got a finite set of resources. We've got finite dollars. We've got finite human capital. We've got finite natural resources. And at some point, we're going to have to make a decision as systemically, how do we allocate those resources to protect everyone and to lift people up? We'll all be better off for it.
Truly. The goal that I'm getting here is that we want to rebuild stronger, resilient communities, especially targeting into the most vulnerable communities who happen to not have the resources in order to get it done, and have truncated things on top of them that is making it really difficult. Where do the opportunities lie in getting equity and access to climate finance and in climate business? Help me understand that.
Well, there's a few things here that we've got to deal with. One is, I think we're going to need to move to a model of public-private partnerships. Part of the challenge here is when you talk about things like, for instance, tree canopy. If I wanted to invest in something as an investor, why would I invest in tree canopy? How do I get my money back? And the answer is, who benefits from it? It's not the investor who benefits from it. It's the public who benefits from it. Or maybe it's the electric utility who has to generate more kilowatts to provide cooling capabilities to communities that don't have sufficient tree canopy. Mm-hmm. We're going to need to think about developing models so that we can drive investment, not philanthropy, actual investment. Because unfortunately, our world is being dictated by who can make money off what. So let's make these programs and projects investable, which requires public and private sector to come together and develop P3 models. I think that's one thing that we can do. We can do that in really, really meaningful scale. We can do that from the micro project level, whether we're talking about microgrids or solar arrays, at the neighborhood level, looking at urban farming, and tree canopy projects, and all sorts of things here that we can do at the local level that don't require utility scale or large scale. We're going to support hundreds of thousands of people to really build it into the communities where they're needed most. And we also have to teach people in those communities how to be able to do that themselves. But they need to also have the resources available. It's not enough to know how. You have to have the resources, the finances, the tools, and the capability to do it as well. And so we've got to build better systems that drive that. And we can do this. We've done it elsewhere. I mean, we're already seeing massive systemic transformation in these sorts of projects. We're just not doing it in the communities left behind. We're doing it in the communities who already have the resource to do it themselves. We can do better than this.
Daniel, you are just so inspiring. Sometimes I don't know if I see you as Buddha, Jesus, or Gandhi. I don't know, but I'm just so thankful that you come and the work that you're doing with HO. Take a minute to talk about the classes that you're offering. So you're offering something for people to learn in order to take care of themselves, right? To learn to fish. So talk about the classes.
This is interesting because this has actually been a perfect example of inequity. We're a professional society. The Association of Climate Change Officers was designed originally to advance the occupation of climate leadership, which we define as being the people in organizations, whether they're government or industry or universities, who are asking the question, how does climate change affect my organization's operations and our mission? What do we do in response? Then we realized we also needed to integrate climate change into numerous other occupations. I happen to think you shouldn't be allowed to be, an architect, a civil engineer, a planner in this country if you're not able to account for climate change in your work. You shouldn't be allowed to work on infrastructure projects if you can't account for it, because when those systems fail, people get hurt, health-wise and economically. And so we started building training programs around that. Well, as you can imagine, as a professional society, generally speaking, there are a couple of ways that professional societies like ours are going to generate revenue. One is through selling training and community services, conferences, registrations, membership dues. Okay. Another is we can get grants. And the third is we can have contracts to provide services for entities who have the resources to pay for them. So let's hone in on the grants. How much money do we really spend on workforce development? Well, we don't really spend a whole lot as a society on education relative to what we should. So consequently, we're not making those investments. So ACO is a professional society. In the 12 years of existence that we have, less than 1% of our overall revenue have come from grants. That's a problem, because what that means is we've only been able to provide services to people who have money. That is an inequity. And so for 9 of our 12 years, the only way that I could provide somebody training was if they could write a check for it. Yeah. Otherwise, I couldn't be in business. If I can't be in business, I can't help anybody. So now we're a nonprofit, but I still have to be able to staff and support the programs. And interestingly, one of the things that changed was about 3 years ago, the state of Maryland came to me and they said, hey, we would like you to train all of our personnel in a particular agency. Actually, it was about 4 years ago. And then a year later, they said, we want you to roll this training out to local governments and to businesses and infrastructure and NGOs and consultants in the state of Maryland. And there was born the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy, which is the nation's first state-run climate change academy. All of a sudden, the situation changed. We had a contract where the state was paying us to train their critical constituents for this effort. And now I don't have to charge registration. And wouldn't you know, the demographics of who is participating in the training changed dynamically, where communities of color were almost impossible to get into the trainings previously. And consequently, by the way, the workforce, there's less than 20% of the workforce are communities of color in the context of climate change and sustainability. That's been studied. We'll be doing more studying of it. But now all of a sudden, half of the people participating in the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy, communities of color. And I can see it because I'm in the room with them. I can see it night and day. I can see it when we're doing it online, and it changed the dynamic of things. So we have these programs that we're rolling out through the state, and sure enough, we get somebody from the state of Pennsylvania who becomes a certified climate change professional, which is an 8-week training program that we administer online. When we're not in COVID, we'll do it in person as a 4-day training program. And she earned her credentials and then went and got her state to contract us to build an academy in Pennsylvania. And we contracted to build one in Michigan. And we're replicating this model of the state saying, you know what, in the absence of federal leadership, we're going to build our capacity to deal with this at local and state levels, in infrastructure, and in our business community. And so that's one thing that's changed. And along the way, we're now starting to get asked, hey, can you train a couple hundred of our senior staff, which we've done for Montgomery County, Maryland, which we've done for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, which we're going to be doing for some big companies, because we can give a basic awareness building. We've also done some micro-learning modules. We're doing like those 7 to 10 minute videos. If you think about a training that somebody has to do maybe for cybersecurity or workplace harassment in their organization, well, what if HR deployed the climate change and equity version of that training? Awareness and literacy. So we're doing those sorts of things as well.
That's fantastic. Daniel, thank you for coming today. I super appreciate you being here, sharing your knowledge and your wisdom, laying out a pathway of what needs to happen and how we bridge and center justice, social justice, and the interconnectedness of it all. Thank you so very much for being here. I know you have 1,000 things to do, we're going to have a short commercial break right now, and then we'll be back with our next speaker, which is Lady T. Thompson.
Hey, Viola, can I just mention a quick shout out on Project Build Up?
Please.
Awesome. So one of the things I mentioned is the building up communities, which Viola, you've been great in providing guidance on, and we're going to kick it off in a couple of weeks. We're announcing a meeting tomorrow to move forward on it. But what we want to do is we want to train people in communities left behind, not just to be certified climate change professionals, to have the capacity to ask and answer, how do we deal with climate change? But we also want to train them to work and develop on projects, microgrids, urban farming, tree canopy, solar arrays at the community level. We're going to put them through a training program that gets them armed to do both. And then we want to put them into an apprenticeship. And so we're looking at a P3 program that brings government and investment and philanthropy together, where we can make these sorts of programs and projects investable, but where we get a workforce in the communities that need these projects that are going to be able to continue to be able to build these projects, and an investment community that wants to because they can get a return on an investment. We have more information about that program, and you can sign up to learn more at climateofficers.org. Under the initiatives header, you'll see information about Project Build Up. But help us do this. We want to, this is micro level and workforce development, project building in communities left behind, and we look forward to your support and participation. Thanks so much, Kreeger.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. We're back. It seems like we're back, everybody. Thank you for staying with us. And this conversation has me imagining a future where we are able to save ourselves and save our planet. We just had Daniel Kreeger, the executive director of the Association of Climate Change Officers, give our keynote. And he really laid the groundwork for what is necessary, why we need to center on justice, and what's the pathway forward in order to do that. Next up in conversation, I'd like to bring to the screen here is Lady T. Thompson. Lady T. Thompson is the principal of AgroBiz. She's the executive director of AgroBiz. She is also the United Nations Association for USA Global Goals Ambassador for Sustainable Development, goal number 8. For decent work and economic development. She has a long list of things that her resume and her bio says. It is an honor and a pleasure to have someone of her stature here with us today to have this conversation. The conversation we're having with you, Lady T, is around food security and sovereignty. You know, you heard Daniel speak. What are some of your initial reactions and thoughts hearing that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I had to look at my notes. I said, did he take my talking points? That was my initial response, because time and time again, it's the same group of marginalized communities that get the worst manifestation of crises after crises after crises. Rather, it is Black, brown, or indigenous populations, females, women and girls, and or disability communities, they get the worst. And I do mean worse. So when he was talking, I was like, oh my gosh, he looked at my talking points today. But that was my initial response.
So yeah, I mean, the people who've been doing this work for a long time, like yourself and like Daniel, the truth remains constant throughout. So first up, I want you to help me understand, and our listening audience, how do we rapidly transform and transition our food systems? We want to make sure that we have a sustainable earth, and that our work and our food systems are earth friendly. What and how do we go about doing that, Lady T? Help us understand, paint the right picture for us.
Well, thank you for that question. Before I could adequately answer how we can rapidly transform and transition our food systems, I have to talk about the small scale farmer. And I'm going to give you a short answer, and
Okay,
then I'm going to try to paint that picture for you.
do
So,
that.
to initially address your question, the short answer is we must invest in smallholder farmers. We have to have that investment in them because we need their resilience for the recovery of two crises: the health crisis, the pandemic
Sure.
of the COVID-19, and the other crisis, which is food insecurity.
That's right.
So I'm going to delve into why. Then the second piece is we have to protect the most vulnerable communities.
Mhm.
Mr. Kreeger, he did an excellent job of doing of sharing my talking points as to why there are systematical reasons why we have to help and protect these most vulnerable communities. And then the third is we have to promote economic development and decent work with the living wage.
Really?
And
Yeah.
last, yes, but definitely not least, we have to enhance risk management for food insecurity. And I think that we can achieve that by what I truly believe is like a North Star is through the Sustainable Development Goals. So
Mhm.
today I have my
I
my
saw
little
it. It's
necklace and my
lovely.
little pen. And the
That's
reason
lovely.
being is because if you look at it prior to the pandemic, right? Economists had already predicted there would be anywhere between 9 to 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, and that 75% of those individuals would be living in urbanized cities. So if we look at it, we have an urbanization swell that's been going on. And I'm like, it's happening today. Every time I go to different countries, I'll give you an example. Like in Abuja, I was in January, February, March, I was in Wuye. I was in an area in Abuja that didn't even exist 2 years ago. I'm like, where did this whole brand new area happen? So the urbanization swell is happening now. And there's so many misconceptions about who feeds us. So most people believe that we are fed solely by industrialized or commercial farmers. And that's not true. We are fed by smallholder farmers. 80% of us are fed worldwide by smallholder farmers. So if you have this huge urbanization swell that's going on, all these people that are going to be into this living in the cities, what's happening to the smallholder farmers?
True.
Because a lot of the
Great question.
urbanization, they take the farms and they build
Mhm.
all of these wonderful infrastructural things. So who's going to feed us? So now we're going to go a little deeper with it. I'm going to
Do
delve
that.
into it. So if we don't have small scale farmers and we have this urbanization swell that's going on, and let's be real, climate change is affecting the food security globally, regionally, and locally. And so the climate change is disrupting the food availability. It's reducing access to food. It affects food quality. And so, what are we going to do? Is what I say to people when I'm having this conversation
You
like
have me
today. So,
shaking again. Now I'm back
right,
to shaking. What are we
right.
going to do?
What are we going to do? We have to invest into our smallholder farmers. And we do that, I think, with the North Star of the Sustainable Development Goals. Why do I think that if we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which was designed to help and leave no one left behind, it can help build success in terms of mitigating a lot of the risks. For example, the goals help to end poverty, and they go hand in hand, or they're intersectioned with economic growth. And it has a range of social needs, which includes education, health, social protections, job opportunities, while also tackling climate change and environmental protection. So if we're inclusive of these, of the sustainable development in everything that we do, we can offset the crises of the food insecurity. So that's why I believe that we have to achieve the sustainable development goals. We have to invest in smallholder farmers. We have to definitely make sure that we protect the most vulnerable, because they always get the brunt, crises after crises. And we have to have living wages in order to stimulate economic development and decent work. And we unequivocally must mitigate the risk for food insecurity, because food insecurity is real. And prior to the pandemic, and I can't say this enough, prior to the pandemic, we, according to FAO, there by 2019, by the end of last year, there were like 630 million people who were starving. They had extreme poverty. So the pandemic has pushed that number to an additional 130 million people. 130
That's
million
staggering.
more people. It's very staggering. Around the world are chronically having food insecurity. So they're not having safe, nutritious food. So just think of it like this. By the end of this year, in another 3 months, these 130 million people will be added on top of the 690. So that's where we're at.
We're at a place right now, in the moment. So much going on. Help me think through, we're looking at building plans. We're looking at Daniel laid out, and we're here to be action oriented. How do women, especially women of African descent, women of color, become change agents within the food security industry?
How do women become change agents? I have a 7-step process. Now,
All right.
It may be good or it may be bad, depending on the audience. And so I first say you have to participate with social justice. You women, all women around the world, have to be a change agent themselves. And one of my favorite quotes came from Congressman Jamie Raskin, from his late dad. And the quote is this: when things look hopeless, you're the hope.
All
so
right.
You have to participate in it with the social justice. The second is we have to have living wages to support the social movement, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's intersect with climate justice. We have to figure out systems that can make it move. So the best way to predict the future is to create it. And sometimes you have to get together and have cooperative development, economic development, and infrastructural development to figure out how you make that living wage actually come into fruition. Then the third thing is we have to strengthen our government nutritional programs. And we have to strengthen it because we're not at the table. And I can't. I brought my notes with me just to make sure. Last week or 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
right, 2 weeks ago, it was the United Nations Sustainable Development Action Zone, and I learned these facts. We have to participate with the government with the nutritional programs, but there's another piece to it, because gender equality comes there.
Sure.
75% of all parliamentarians are men. 75% of all managerial decision makers are men. 67% of all climate negotiators are men. 87% of people at the peace table are men.
Wow.
So we
What
have
effect are
to
you painting?
participate. We have to participate. So the fourth part, and all of those statistics applies to the fourth piece too, because policies and practices to reduce climate change is essential. Why is it essential? Because climate change increases the temperatures. Climate change actually impacts extreme uh, precipitation patterns. Climate change actually sometimes have reduction in water availability in certain areas. So certain areas, you may not have rainy seasons. So if you don't have rainy seasons, you can't grow certain crops. And then there has to be availability of agriculture productivity. So that leads me to the fifth element, which is the right to nutritious food for all. We have to make sure that we can feed people, because guess what? Poverty is man-made. So
Yes.
if we have nutritional systems that can feed everybody, regardless to their social economic standards, we don't have to have extreme poverty. We don't have to have people going hungry. We produce enough food in this world. And that goes to my sixth element, which is to increase access to jobs and housing. When you give economic development and you have basic needs met, you change the whole platform of any individual. And so, as global citizens, this is something that should concern all of us. But last, but definitely not least, we have to invest in local food, and we have to invest in farm economics.
Mm.
So those are the things that I say that every woman, irrespective of their education, irrespective of where they live at, that they can participate in being change agents themselves, because it's not your situation, it's your reaction to it that
It's the
defines you.
reaction to it that defines you. We have laid out a plan of action here to get people organized, and mobilized in order to take action into their lives. And so, Lady T, thank you so much for joining in with us. We want to bring our panel up next to really kind of give some reaction to what we've been hearing from Lady T and our keynote speaker. So, our panel includes Michael Paul Hill. Michael Paul Hill is a San Carlos Apache liaison and spiritual advisor. Over the past decade, Michael has done extensive work on Apache rights at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous People, the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous issues, and both in New York and in Switzerland. Next up, we want to Dr. Satnam Duchar, who is the CEO of FCH Hotels in the United Kingdom. She's also a Goodwill ambassador and a diplomat for the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights, focusing on policy development. The other person that we're bringing to the forefront here would be Nancy Smith as a speaker, as a panelist. Nancy is an experienced program manager, demonstrated history in working in emergency management. Nancy is a strong community organizer, and she is skilled in climate change, public health, and she is also an MIT liaison. So I want you guys to give some reactions and thoughts to what you guys heard from Lady T. Lady T, stick around here, but we're going to hear from our panel here. What are your thoughts and reactions to what you've heard, guys?
Hi, Viola.
Hello.
You look stunning.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But more importantly,
I'm really sorry. You took me off a few times
my hands are shaking from hearing all of the opportunity that lies before us. So, Michael, we heard from Lady T about the need for women and especially to really get involved, that there's nothing but men at the table. And I want to get your reactions and your feedback to that conversation.
Very, very important. Viola, it's so important. The women empowerment is so important. You know what? People are doing a lot. There are things happening in the world. Women are trying to come out. Men are trying to support, but still not enough. You know what I mean? Still not enough. There is so much more to be done, so much more. How do we do it? More awareness, more, so it's more and more and more. So I do understand, when we're trying so hard, but there is parts of world where women are still struggling a lot. They've been treated as third grade citizens, so I think we don't have to look at one area per one area. We have to look collaboratively as a whole. So where people don't have such outreach, women don't have the outreach, we'll have to put some kind of measures in so they can come out, so they can be helped. Because in certain parts of the world, you see, women have some kind of positioning, right? They can stand out for their own rights, their own values. But certain parts that we live in, no, 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 no. Women have no say at all. You see, uh, Southeast Asian countries is a lot. We see that firsthand. Women suffering a lot. So I think where these organizations that work for women empowerment, they'll have to channelize it really well, that they can support areas, and specifically those areas where women don't have that kind of strength, and put some programs in, maybe more and more awareness programs in, some kind of help, particularly country wise, to get some leaders in, who can then support those people there. So I think there's a lot that needs doing, and I think it makes sense. That is why I keep saying all the time, we have to collaborate, we have to work together, because alone you can't do that much, even as one force you can't, unless you join in, everyone joins in, it can't happen. So it's very, very, very imperative, that everyone in their own place just raises that voice, just takes their own responsibility to make sure that we are doing our own part, not relying on anyone else.
Thank you. I so appreciate your feedback there, Dr. Duchar. It's so important. Anyone else from the panel have something important to say, something to contribute before we move on to our next guest speaker?
I have something to say real quick, and good morning to everybody. I'm down the reservation right now, so greetings. Patriarchy is an issue everywhere, and the like here on the reservation, we're matrilineal society. We come from that. We North and South America have been that all since the beginning. But the flowing in of patriarchy within our system, within our tribe here, has it has put our women down, and I feel that I don't know because I'm not a woman, but I feel like they have just been pushed to the bottom, especially here on the res. We celebrate our the women and their whole thing, their whole life, um, from birth to when they become a woman, and we do ceremonies like this. But the thing is that the woman in our society was pushed down to to nothing, to the slave child, or to the so-called squaw on the res, and all these things that they have done. And earlier, Mr. Kreeger had talked about societies and peoples that were on the fringes. That's us, and some of us have to deal with the constant, where they're going to get their food, or we don't have jobs here. We're 80% unemployed here. There's nothing around except mines, and all these things. There's too much in one spot, and right now, within our community, people are barely trying to wake up, or are too busy caught up in Americana, and they're not trying to even promote their own way of life anymore. It's become so patriarchal, and we're losing our own touch. And it's amazing to me that there's not too many natives out here that are trying to even stand up at the moment. We have Greta Thunberg running around Earth doing her job, whereas our people have just been silent. And I don't know if that's because of their fear, because living on a reservation ain't too great. It's also a mind issue with the colonialism and how they made us be this way. But I don't like the victimhood type thing. So it's just like that. It's hardcore, and so I just hope that we can do something, because the Earth is woman. That's what we call the Earth here in the Apache language. Equals ton. It's a woman, and if the Earth is 70% of its species is gone, all of these things are combining, and it's becoming an issue, I believe, on the female gender here in our world, and men have to step back a moment, and how
Thank you
we
for
bring
all
that.
of that. I appreciate all of that. We want to bring in our next speaker, and your points are so valid, and they really touch on our last speaker, Victor, when he comes on. Victor will really talk and delve into that equality issue that needs to be taken on. Our next speaker is Margaret Eaglin. Margaret, she's a powerhouse, no doubt. She's a climate change sustainability activist and an epidemiologist. She's leading work in Chicago right now. And Margaret's focus of her work is to try to understand how urban local health departments are addressing the interconnection between climate change and health inequities within their jurisdiction. Margaret, thank you for joining us today. Super appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Viola.
You're on mute, Margaret. All right.
I clicked off mute. Can you hear me?
So you clicked off. Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you. Your talking points are so deep. You're here to bring some knowledge and put a pathway forward to help us to think through how do we rebuild our lives through education and capacity building, especially for vulnerable populations and people in poverty. The first question we have is, I need to understand this. Our audience does too. How does poverty make us vulnerable to poor health outcomes?
These are great questions. Like I said, they're like dissertations. So I need to basically unpack this. I'm also a systems thinker, so definitely shout out to Daniel for mentioning this. So, poverty is a worldwide, sorry, I can't speak this morning, social problem that is basically embedded in all of our culture and society. And so it's made up these complex systems of barriers that prevent families and individuals to access basic health care, food, shelter, etc. And so definitely poverty and poor health outcomes are linked. Poverty is definitely a cause and consequence of poor health. Poverty increases the chances of you becoming ill health, having adverse health outcomes, and being of poor health in terms can trap a community in poverty. So, just to sort of lay the groundwork, just want to give you, of course, being an epidemiologist, got to give you statistics. So before COVID hit, the official poverty rate was 10.5, and it had decreased about 1.3% from 2018. And so this is like the fifth year it's been decreasing or declining. And so in 2014, the poverty rate basically fell 4.3% from 14.8 to 10.5. And so, and in 2018, there were about 34 million people in poverty. And this was about 4.2 million less than the previous year in 2018. And so if you look at, across all racial and Hispanic origin groups, as well as age groups, poverty rate has declined. However, if the characteristics that are at higher risk for have higher poverty rates than the national rate are African Americans. Their rate is 18.8. This is in 2019, and I'm talking about currently. Hispanic, 15.7. Being a female, 11.5. Those who are under the age of 18. Those who are foreign-born, it also depends on where you live. The South of the U.S. has a higher poverty rate than, say, the East and West and etc. If you did not work at least 1 week, you have less than full-time employment year-round. You have a disability, no high school diploma, or no college, puts you at a poverty rate.
Wow. I mean, this is just a lot to take on. Wow. Being a woman, being a person of color, just like, bam.
Yes, exactly. And it doesn't end there. So,
okay. It gets worse.
It gets worse. So, when when COVID hit, it just got totally, it blew it out of the proportion. So the poverty rate, according to, so I was doing some reading looking at The Guardian, and Columbia University had published a paper in October, recently, October 15th, that basically found that the number of Americans in poverty grew by 8 million since May. And so the poverty rate in August was 7.3%, and it dropped slightly to 16.7% in September. And this had slightly due to the CARES Act. That only contributed to 1.3% of the reduction. But the main problem is that the growth in poverty has been more concentrated, of course, in Black and Latinx communities. You've seen more unemployment rates. It's twice that of white Americans, particularly. I mean, it was prior to, but even more so in this pandemic. And then, of course, we have to tack on climate change. We've had two hurricanes back to back in the Gulf. And, the hurricane season is still going on. So, poverty rates among Black and Hispanics currently is around 25%.
So you're saying, Margaret, that because people are poor and they have lack of access to resources, I'm just trying to put it through my filters and get it back out and help me make it make sense. Because people are poor, they have lack of access. They cannot get to the things that they need. They may not have air conditioners to cool themselves. They may not have access to healthy, nutritious, organic food. All of those combined creates this, really impact on their lives and contributes to people having poor health outcomes that leads them to being further victimized by COVID and climate change.
Right. But I do want to add on another.
Add.
Is that, we need to look at the cause and the factors of poverty.
Wow.
So, the cause, and this was taken from Dr. Phil Bartell talking about factors of poverty, the Big Five. He defines cause as something that contributes to the origin of the problem. And so these, of course, are rooted in structural racism, and so which is a driver of economic inequality. Mm-hmm. And income inequality is a fundamental driver of poverty. So it's sort of cyclical.
I'm hearing that from you. Yeah.
And so then you talk about the factor. This is something that basically sustains the problem because it already exists. Mm-hmm. And so this is really rooted in our sort of policies and practices and systems that are rooted in the political, societal, economic, and environmental injustices that exist global, national, state, local, etc. And so, these factors differ by place, race, income. And so they result in these inequities that exhibit, distributions of power, money, historical disinvestment in communities, discriminatory practices, and less access to health care. So basically, poverty in a nutshell creates adverse health outcomes because it basically forces communities to live in an environment that make them sick. They don't have, like you said, access to healthcare, clean air conditions, nutrition, etc.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and then just to add on, unfortunately, the low income and minority communities are already being plagued by these, myriad of health conditions. But these are the same communities that are experiencing the higher rates of illness and death due to COVID. And also they are at higher risk for being exposed to climate related hazards.
So, Margaret, help me, paint the picture, lead the way. What needed to rebuild folks in vulnerable communities to have healthier lives and to increase the capacity of health systems to center on equity and justice? How do we do that thing? I know it's big. I know it's complex, but maybe, just maybe, I believe that is not impossible. So, lead the way in thinking that through.
I'll do my best. I think about that topic when I think about creating healthy, sustainable, equitable, and of course, climate resilient communities. It is a multi-pronged approach. It's not something where you start at the top and then that'll work and they'll start at the bottom. You really need to do both. And so again, you need to address the root causes and the upstream drivers of health inequities, which again are the same for climate change and COVID. And so when I think about the root causes, I think about the soil. I think about, I don't know if you heard the gardener's tale by Dr. Kamara Jones. And so really the soil is the various levels of racism, but also this U.S. caste system that I will talk about in a little bit, that Isabel Wickerson had wrote about, one of my favorite books. And so the upstream drivers or your social determinants of health are basically those that shape community living. So these are energy, transportation, land use, housing, planning, like Lady T talked about food and agriculture and other socioeconomic systems. But then we also need to think about, in conversations about equity, we need to understand the definition of equity. We also need to understand what are the inequities before we can start tackling equity. So, and then what justice is and what the difference of those two. So, I don't know if you've seen the image of, the father, the mother, and the child looking at playing a game.
Oh, yeah, I'm very familiar with that image.
Huh?
I'm very familiar with that image.
Yes, and so, but the justice is taking that wall away. So you don't need the part.
Yes,
that's the bottom. Take that barrier away.
Yeah.
And so, but the other thing also I think people have already had mentioned about is working across sectors. And so, health and all policies approach basically is to ensure that, health considerations, health, equity, and sustainability considerations are incorporated into the decision makers, the planning process in order to
right from the start is what you're saying, right from the beginning. That's
right
the
from
part
the beginning and all throughout the process.
Okay.
And so to have the goal in mind that we're creating these healthy, equitable communities, we need to have these people at the table from the beginning. Perfect. And so, the other thing too is when we think about sustainability is composed of these three different pillars: social, environmental, and economic. They all, again, have to be centered around health, equity, and justice. All of that needs to be sort of intermersed in that discussion. It needs to be, So if we talk about strategies, and I think Daniel had mentioned this about the EPA, they have a really good document that was published in 2014 and is called Creating Equitable, Healthy, and Sustainable Communities. And so they identify these strategies that integrate smart growth, environmental justice, equitable development principles to build healthy, sustainable, and inclusive communities. And so I'm just going to go through them briefly. One is facilitate meaningful community engagement. And so it might be because we have a large growth of immigrants and English may not be your primary language, have this multilingual outreach. And then also have, holding community planning workshops where we have residents at the beginning in these planning discussions. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Also promote public health and clean, safe environment, strengthening existing communities, provide adequate, affordable housing, create new affordable housing, provide transportation options, and also include access for opportunities such as safe routes to school, and probably access to healthy foods, and etc. And lastly, to preserve existing cultural features within a neighborhood. You don't want to do gentrification, just remove that kind of thing. So, but the last piece I think is even more, and this is where I get to the root, and this is kind of where I started my understanding about the issue of race. And so Dr. Kamara Jones really talks about the three levels of race: the institutionalized, personally mediated, and internalized. Sorry, I can't speak. So, just briefly, institutionalized basically is your differential access to these goods and services. It manifests as access to power. And so it's differential access to quality education, sound housing, gainful employment. And so personally mediated is the prejudice and the discrimination. And so it's the lack of respect. There's poor, you may not receive you may receive poor or no services. There's suspicion, there's purse clutching and scapegoating and dehumanization, which we see a lot now with the police brutality and hate crimes.
Yeah,
and lastly,
right.
I'm sorry.
I said, yeah, right. I'm here with you.
And so lastly is, this internalized racism. And so this is, not believing in others who look like me or not believing in themselves. And so, but my last thing when I said about the caste system, which is brought a different framework to my thinking around this, is that, Isabel Wickerson basically says that racism permeates the American culture. However, she doesn't think that race alone explains the systemic oppression of Black people in America. It's shape-shifting, unspoken, and it maintains this hierarchy and inequality in America. And so just the quick definition of a caste is this artificial construction, a fixed embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group over another. So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So in that you're laying all of this out, like rebuilding healthy lives and showing that in order to do that, we really need to understand equity and justice and remove barriers. I'd like to bring one of our panelists into this conversation to give her thoughts to really uplift and kind of showcase some of that work. Nancy, I would like to bring you in here to have this conversation, Nancy Smith. Margaret's really going in, laying it out about what's happening, what are the causes, how does it start, where does it begin. Bring this to a practical place that you're doing the work in the community and you see some of this, you're trying to build the capacity and create healthier outcomes. Talk about that, Nancy.
Okay, I definitely will, but I first want to just do a shout out to you, Margaret. As I look over your shoulder, I see Dr. M.L. King championing all of what it was, the evil of poverty. A lot of people sometimes forget that speech, and we sometimes just think about civil rights. But one of Dr. King's dream was to tackle poverty. And so as we look at from 1961, 68 to today, those same overlays, it has not changed, right? We're still thinking globally about poverty. We're still thinking locally about poverty. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit more about in the Boston area, what we've been able to do. Last year, 2019, we had a very wonderful opportunity with the Museum of Science to do what was called a heat mapping project. Now, we did not know at this time that COVID was on its way, but there was a combination of a few things that had happened in Boston in 2019. We were very fortunate to bring Cook Survival by Zip Code in and showed this in several neighborhood communities. And we had already scheduled to have the director come back in order to talk a little bit more about systemic racism, not just from in Chicago, but in all urban cities. So we had these two wonderful events going on, and people in Boston had an opportunity to start looking at the heat maps of the city. Okay, first of all, people were shocked. Okay, they could not believe what they were seeing because Boston being a cold climate city, people knew that the temperatures were changing, but they didn't know how rapidly they were because, it's like, oh, we have a little heat wave here in Boston, but you're looking at global heat islands changing everywhere. And so people really, this was, I kind of say, was a clash of the evolution of the New Englanders. I'm going to use that word, and I say that lovingly. I am from Atlanta, so at times jokes is like people say, Nancy, you're preparing Boston to feel like Mississippi in 2050. And along with that, what are some of those solutions? So this past summer, many P3 models. I'm going to go back to Daniel. That's my favorite FEMA model is private and public partnerships.
That's
So
right.
we had, yeah, I love it. So we had people for 2 months to try to really look at what we could do was human solutions in Boston to help people stay physically distancing, socially distancing, and the whole 9 yards. And one of the things that came out of our working group was to create a very short term solution, which was actually to find funding. Well, we actually found money funding to help purchase air conditions and fans, box fans. Now, people say, oh, really? Box fans? Okay, so if you just Google box fans in the United States, they give them away in Atlanta, Georgia. They give them away in Corpus Christi. They give them away now in Nebraska because what we forget is that even though you may not think that the cost of a $32 fan is expensive, but for some households it
Cheaper.
is,
Yeah, for
right?
some households it's cheaper.
Right. And we were able to actually use data from our from one of our large ambulance service who actually had transported about 70 people during the heat wave, heat related illnesses to one of our large hospitals here in Boston. And so that gave us the data. Here we go, that big data, because you need that data to go get money, right, folks? We use that data to secure funding, and so we're quite excited to be able to. We have three organizations that are rolling this out. Yes, I'm just going to tell you the funding came in a little late, but we will be giving away these air conditions
Perfect.
and fans in the month of November. And I do want to give a big shout out to New York because New York was able to secure, I think, about 67,000 air conditions to be installed in New York, and fans also. So we are looking for very short term solutions for a long term problem. It would be wonderful if we could retrofit all of the old housing in Boston. That would be utopia, right? We would fall right into all of the wonderful things with climate. But in the meantime, what we're working on is trying to build out one area. And then we actually got another wonderful opportunity. We got accepted to for heat vulnerability assessment. Now that is huge for Boston, very huge. And I just want to let you guys know about that because that's going to give us the even more tools. And here we go, more data. As much as I try to get away from the big data, you guys know everybody asks for it.
Everyone asks for it.
Funding.
So for that piece, we're going to hear about that towards our wrap up. We want to bring Victor Foley up, who is our next guest speaker. Margaret and Nancy, stay here in the studio because there'll be more time towards the end to really give your last points that are super important in order to balance towards justice and climate change and COVID. Victor Foley, he is another powerhouse of an individual that I've had the pleasure to meet and make relationship with. Victor is the executive director of Disaster Resilience Network in Ghana, a not-for-profit organization that addresses the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events in vulnerable communities through research, advocacy, awareness creation, and program development. Mr. Foley is a champion of promoting making resilient cities. Thank you so much, Victor, for coming and taking a part of this conversation today. You've heard so much being here in the studio. You've heard Daniel lay out, really shine a light, being a torch for what is necessary in order to strike balance in climate change and really centering on justice. You've heard from the incomparable, brilliant Lady T. Thompson really lay out the necessary work in order for small scale farmers and the role of women. And you've had Margaret really kind of go in with the research and information to empower us to understand how to how poverty plays a role in what we're experiencing with health inequity and climate change. You're here today, my good brother, my good friend, to really make the case for humanity. Climate change is a human right. I want you to go there. I want you to bring the heat with that. How do we establish environmental preparedness as a human right?
Thank you so much, my sister Viola. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a wonderful platform. I listen to powerhouses like Daniel Kreeger. Let me say this. I was a student in his class. Daniel is my teacher. So I'm very honored to be on the same platform like teacher and student. I'm so much honored. He hit the nail right, talking about the workforce that we need for this agenda. So it's been said, and I realize also that many devastations of the environment are to be blamed on climate change. For now, we already know that the impacts of climate change are being observed across diverse geographical ends. The greenhouse gases that is impacting negativity on the environment has brought huge consequences to humanity and planet. We realize that also on the health aspect, we've been even exposed because of the greenhouse gases that is being trapped in the atmosphere for long. Talking about unbreathable, poor quality air that is causing lung cancers and other diseases. We are talking about many livelihood that has been displaced. We are talking about poverty here and there. Children and aged are also being infected by different diseases, all because of climate change. So it is something that humanity, if we say we are still going to be negligent, then we are at the crossroads. What I want to say is even the excessive heat, because you realize also that the fossil fuel that has been trapped in the atmosphere brings a lot of heat. The other lady talked about crop planting and the vegetation and let me see. I mean, yes, when there is excessive heat, all our crops dried out. The land are drought, and even there's even shortage of fresh water. We can't even have water, and it happened somewhere in South Africa, and even Ghana also had a feel of it. So climate change, we need to know that we have to put our actions forward. We need to bring solutions forward so that at the end of the day, it is not going to be a great toll on humanity and all of us. It affects me and you. And this is a platform that we are going to say we need action now for climate change. When we talk about human rights and also talk about inequality, these subjects have been featured a lot on articles of United Nations. It has been featured a lot on most of their reports. Some people are even pointing hands on them that where is the inequality? Where is the human rights? As we are going forward, they themselves have even been accused of a lot of violation, but I'm not going to go there now. But let me say this, who is going to hold corporations accountable? Who is going to hold governments accountable? Who is going to hold all of these industry players accountable? It's going to be me and you. So if you want to talk about human rights issues, if you want to talk about climate justice, it is how you realize how you can address climate justice in the face of human rights issues, and how you can use the court of law to hold accountable governments, to hold accountable corporations, and make sure that we will be heard, our voices will be heard. So let me say this. Daniel made it clear that where is the workforce? We need that workforce. We need the numbers. Because talking about Ghana, talking about Africa, who is going to go to court to sue governments in terms of environmental degradation? I mean, just ask that question. Who is going to do that? Who has the capacity to do that?
But I think there's an opportunity, right, with your organization, and you're doing an incredible amount of that work, is doing the environmental preparedness, you're creating a community imperative, getting local people on the ground to be able to take care of themselves. So maybe, people aren't big enough, strong enough to, in certain communities, take it all the way where it needs to go. But in order to be prepared, understanding that you have a right to life, and your climate where you live, right? Your environment, where you live, the earth. This is your right. This is your home, and you have a right to live in a healthy place. I think, and I don't know much, but I'm open to hearing your thoughts. That getting the community prepared, having that community imperative for environmental preparedness, to be ready, to stay safe, is something that we can do. What are your thoughts around that?
Yes, so it boils down that we need a concerted effort to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in our environment, for it to be sustainable. It is a project that we have already started in Ghana, and we are going to say, let's blow this effort worldwide. We need the human resource gap to be filled with the climate change management and adaptation, preparing the communities, making people leaders, making people know that this is our right. What we need to do when we see corporations, when we see other institutions of government going above the law, because there is compliance, there's supposed to be regulation, there's supposed to be policy, but the poor person, the vulnerable person doesn't know that. So we go into the community, and this is the time that we have deployed a program called the Accredited Carbon Traders. We are going to make it very simple. We are going to make it blunt that we need the arts program everywhere in the world. That is what I'm going to say, because we realize also different sectors have the human resources, like the financial sectors, that the transportation sectors, they have the human resource. But what about climate change management and adaptation? Something that we have to fight. Where are the human resources? So the arts program, Accredited Carbon Traders program, I am going to say that we need partners in every country. Daniel just said it. That is the workforce, because we need the numbers. We need the numbers to sign petitions. We need the numbers to go to court and all of that, because it's not going to be hearsay. It's not going to be rhetorics. We're supposed to act on it globally. So let's feel, yes, and the people.
And the people who are going to act on that, we heard that a lot of the people doing the work or at the table happens to be men. So he for she is more than a slogan. He for she is something that I know, Victor, that you believe in totally. What's the opportunity that we have before us to have men support women, especially Indigenous women, rural women, as climate change stewards?
I mean, he for she, I signed on he for she several years. Women need equal opportunity in assessing equal projects. So it can't be through choosing to give women more, but through giving them opportunity to do more. Should I repeat that? Women need equal opportunity in assessing equal projects and programs, but it cannot be through choosing to give women more, but through giving them more opportunity to do more. Because
removing the barrier that's there, as Margaret clearly laid out, is like removing the thing so that it's not about equality, it's about justice.
It's about justice.
Is that what I'm hearing you saying? It's like you're creating a pathway so that there is justice, so that all people can participate to the best of their fullest potential.
Exactly, because the opportunities are there, but we need equal. We need to crush the inequality, give women the opportunity for them to do more. We have been promoting women to be on several boards on disaster risk reduction management committees, because we realize that women are the best stewards in terms of managing our environmental resources, and women will be the best, to give decisions in terms of disaster risks and building resilience in communities. So let's not say it's about respect, but if you just, respect are earned, it cannot be taken, because when you just give respect, it's finally fades away. The opportunity should be equal. Understand, the injustice should be wiped off. Women should grab the same opportunities just like men. So I am a woman activist. DRN Ghana, we are he for she. We stand for women, and we make sure that they will have the equal opportunities so that they can do more. And I believe you that they are going to be the best stewards in climate change management and adaptation and disaster and building resilience and environmental sustainability.
Michael Paul said something very similar when he came on a few moments ago as one of our panelists, and we're going to bring all of our panelists back on here to do this wrap-up conversation and get some final thoughts. But he really laid out the place as an Indigenous person that women really hold a special role as climate change stewards, because as the Earth is considered to be Mother Earth in traditional viewpoints, that women hold a critical role as nurturers. So that's an interesting concept. And I'm so pleased that Disaster Resilience Network is leading the way in making sure that human rights are valued in our thinking, in our policy, in our program development of making sure that environmental preparedness is number one. Thanks for joining. I don't go anyplace. We're putting everybody back into the main in here so we can have the final conversations and wrap up and thoughts. So here we are. We're having this final conversation. Some thoughts. The last thoughts I want you guys to really. You guys are all powerhouses. You've laid out some processes that are challenging. All of this work is complex, it's complicated, but I don't believe that it's impossible. And today we learned a lot. So if you learned one thing today that you definitely want to make sure that the audience takes with them, or one thing that's important for the audience to grab a hold of, to lead with, to make an investment in, what would that be? Go ahead, Lady T. Lady T, you're on mute. You're muted. Let's unmute you.
Okay, sorry about that. First of all, I have to say again, thank you for this dialogue, because in dialogues like this, we have to continue to motivate and create and cultivate a new generation of activists to accelerate change for climate justice. Because at the end of the day, you cannot. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Because at the end of the day, you cannot eat coal and you cannot drink oil. So we have to have these dialogues so we can generate the conversation and cultivate a new generation of activists and include women at the table, even if we drag in our seats to the table in all decisions related to climate justice.
Lady T, I just heard you say, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your own folding chair and pull up.
Yes.
All right. I just love that. Thank you so very much. I mean, I'm just honored and amazed. I mean, your energy just coming through this screen virtually is something. And the work that you're doing with AgroBiz is so important. Thank you for all of your years of hard work and labor. You are what's right with the world. Michael Paul, what are your final parting thoughts that's important for our listening audience to know? And you're unmuted now.
Well, one of the things
Muted again.
It looks like Michael's having lag issues.
I think he's having mic issues. It's really tough being on the reservation. Earlier, we talked about how there is a technology divide that is.
Okay.
Are you here now, Michael?
I can, yeah.
All right.
One of the things that what we do, I guess, with Ed Food Foundation, what we've been doing is we have a conservancy corps, and we go here and there, and we do preparations for purification. What people are talking about to us Indian people, Native peoples, is we're going through purification, and there's the little in-betweens that we haven't touched upon because everybody has an idea of how we're going to sustain ourselves. One of the things that we do is we do ceremonies, we do sweat lodges, we do things like this, getting back to the basics. Sure. But that also means that we have to allow our Mother Earth also to take care of ourselves, where we as people of this earth are going to have to ride some things out, because what's going on the reservation surely is not happening in, for example, Washington, D.C. or New York City. We're really, really, really marginalized people, unseen, unheard, and it needs to be taken care of. We're the root foundation of here in the United States of the people. There's very few of us left, and it really saddens me to see not really any of my elder females anywhere doing what as they ought to by standing up really strong for this time. And it breaks my heart actually, because we need you. we need you. But I don't want to say anymore. I think that's good enough.
So, Michael, I really want to thank you and for you coming on board. It was important to have you here because my father couldn't be here. My father is deceased, but my father is Cheyenne. And so I know how important and how little voice oftentimes. He was a child that went through the schools, where he was rehomed and his language was taken from him. So all a part of that happened to him in Oklahoma. And so I just really want to thank you and for being and doing the spiritual work necessary in order to keep us together, because there is a spiritual component to this. As I was talking earlier, like I'm shaking all the time. I'm like, what do we do? How do we go? Like our planet, our home is, on fire. And I don't know what to do. And so this is the pathway. This conversation is the pathway towards action. So thank you so very much for being here. Margaret.
Inviting me. Thank you too, all of you.
Two quick things. One is continue to address those root causes that contribute to climate pollution, inequities, and climate change. Without that, we're still going to have these continual problems. Also, I want to give a great shout out to Daniel Kreeger for his ACO organization. I'm glad to see more Black and Brown individuals who are engaged in climate change and gaining their CCP. I'm still working on it, just a shout out. So
get those letters.
I'm working on it.
Excellent. There's a question from the audience here, and it reads, excess particulate matter carries the virus into Black and Brown communities where there's already higher concentrations of diesel particles. We must work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Reactions, thoughts to that comment?
This is Lady T. The largest contributor to that is agriculture. We know agriculture is the world's largest employer. So figuring out ways to go back to traditional agricultural practices will help offset that. That's the one thing that I try to tell everyone every time I do a program and I do cooperative development, and looking at practical ways to recycle irrigation. Those are two things to help mitigate some of those greenhouse emissions from the agricultural equipment that we use.
That's perfect. Thank you for taking that up.
Nancy,
Daniel, you have a thought. Please share it.
I do. And, this is a challenge. We need roughly 50% more food by the year 2050 to feed people, right? And we're not feeding people enough. And at the same time, we've got a system of producing of food that is causing the problem on top of it. That's a bad combination. It's causing the problem, and we have to do more of it. That makes the problem worse. We've got to get better at this. We've got to get better at our ag systems. We've got to use healthy soils programs. We've got to understand the implications of runoff from these chemicals going in. This is all stuff that we have to do better. And we've got to stop acting like just scaling up production is a win. It's not. And until we get our arms around that, we're going to really struggle. And we are going to increase production by a lot. And then add to it that 2/3 of our fresh water across the world is used for agriculture. And in some parts of the world, we're water stressed now and increasingly so because of climate change. So this is all tied in. We've got to do better. And I just want to say, Lady T made the comment that you hit on about bringing the chair, folding it out, and getting at the table. This happens in a lot of different arenas. As a non-lawyer working in a law firm, I didn't have a hat or a leg to stand on. But I decided from day one that they put their pants on the same way that I do. And I held myself as an equal in that room.
Good.
I actually thought I had a better education than they did. So I just said, well, listen, I know my stuff better than you know my stuff. So I'm the expert here. And you're going to recognize that expertise. I think we need voices from all communities to stand up and say, damn it, I'm at this table, and take no second to that, is to not be willing to allow it to be, there are going to be some who are going to force exclusion. That is happening, and forced oppression. And we need communities to consistently say, hell no, I'm at this table.
Absolutely. We have another audience response who's just giving some praise, says, thanks for sharing this great conversation. Truly, it has been a deep conversation that you guys have been sharing, big nuggets of wisdom here. Nancy, what are your thoughts, reactions, last final comments that it's important for the audience to know?
Okay, great. I'm going to give my shout outs, of course, to Viola and Daniel. And, I had separation anxiety after we finished our course because I kept calling him like, classes were over because you get filled up so much that, you want to run out and start doing more work, right? Okay, but what I want to just say is for the community engagement, those who are closest to the pain must be there for the solution. We cannot do anything unless we bring it all the way down to the grassroots level. And I think I'm just going to just put this out there really quickly. With COVID, I'm an emergency manager. And one of the things that happened very quickly was that I wear both hats, right? Public health, emergency management, climate. I'm a hybrid, basically, right? We all have become hybrids. But one of the things that happened during this COVID pandemic, when we do tabletops, the first thing they do is take away electricity from us, right? But we had electricity, right? So one of the things that I saw go into 100 work was the neighborhood association groups, because they know block by block exactly everything that is going on. And we need to put more money, I mean that money, towards those organizations that don't always have their 501(c)(3s, right? Because they are providing strengthening movement in those block by block neighborhoods. And I just want to put that out, and then that's it for me. Thank you.
That's so super important. Often we talk about in circles that I'm in, the nonprofit industrial complex, where you have to have all of your things in order, but there's people who are doing good work, who are saving lives, who don't have time for the paperwork. They may not even know how to do the paperwork, but they definitely can give you the cachet and entry into, if you partner with them, to do what is necessary. Nancy, thank you for lifting that up. So super important. We have another comment here from Priscilla in Ghana. She says, I'm Priscilla from Ghana. It's a great initiative. Keep up the good work. So another kudos to all of you guys for the work that's happening. We have Margaret. Did you give your thoughts, your final thoughts, Margaret? Okay. All right. This is old. I have a gray hair sitting here on my head now. I have like 20 whole strands. I'm catching up. I'm catching up.
Yeah, more than you do.
A question from another question: how can we find out more about HO and we join from Africa to become climate change officers? That's a really great question. And Daniel, you want to share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, you can learn more about ACCO or ACO at www.climateofficers.org. So climate like climate change, officers like officers of companies, plural, .org. And in that website, there's some things I'll point you to. One is Under Training, our live online CCP program, of which Viola, Nancy, Victor, and Margaret have all participated. We run this twice quarterly. We have a U.S. Eastern Time Zone daytime program and an evening program. The evening program starts next week. It's about an 8-week program with 8 classes over those 8 weeks, although it's not one per week, so that you can take a look at the schedule. They're about 3-hour classes in the evening. We have a daytime program that's about 3.5 hours. We will have those programs kick back up again in January. We'll run 2 of them, offset about 3 weeks. And I want to mention on that, one of the perks to moving online in this COVID world is my out-of-pocket costs are gone now. I don't have to feed, and I don't have to pay for venues, and I don't have to pay for travel, which means I can give out scholarships galore. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in taking the CCP program that Nancy, Margaret, Victor, and Viola all took, that you can do so for free. And I know the guy who administers that scholarship program.
Can you imagine that?
I've dialogue with him every night in the mirror. It's disturbing. So definitely check it out. Climateofficers.org. If you want to learn about the scholarship program, it's climateofficers.org/scholarship. Really simple. And you can do that program. If you're interested in joining ACO, we have a COVID special running for $1 a month for the first 6 months.
That's fabulous. Daniel, thank you. Everybody, we are at time. And I really just want to take this moment, take this opportunity to say that we're creating a bridge, right, to fill the gap between climate change, social welfare, environmental sustainability, and health equity. And it's a hard thing to do, but it's not impossible. It's complex, but within it lies an opportunity that is centered around justice. Today we may not figured it all out. We've had some really great conversation, but what I do know between all of us is that we're deeply committed to moving things and to moving towards action. And we know that what the right next step is to create an opportunity to support intersectional point of view that allows us to strengthen vulnerable populations. There is an opportunity right now before us to support project buildup through ACCO. And that is what's on the table, to create a fund to support that work, and also to support the work of making sure that Black and Brown people get to be at the table, that we get to have a fund that gets to address our issues of resiliency, that we can have a fund that we can draw from to build ourselves up, to restabilize ourselves, to prevent disasters, to mitigate the impact of that. For all of that work that is happening, the International Institute is partnered up with all of these people here at the table to make sure that we create this development fund, that we support ACCO, we support Daniel Kreeger and his work in creating justice to be at the center of climate change. I want to thank everybody, our listening audience, for participating and watching and hanging out with us today in this conversation. And stay tuned for more conversations in the future and more developments from Daniel and this network of folks who are coming together to create the positive impacts that we need to see. Thank you guys so much for being the right thing we need to have in the world today. Appreciate you. All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.